Hey, what's up everybody? Bauer Brown back with you. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Terrain Sculpt Mode. You know, what it is and how to work with it. So, Terrain Sculpt Mode, when you're working on your map, you're going to be adding or changing or removing land features. Right? So if you want to make a hill, dig a pit, something like that, that's going to get done through Terrain Sculpt Mode. So now up here on your toolbar, you see this button with the up and down arrows there. And if you hover over top of it, it basically says Terrain Sculpt Mode. Now, over on your right-hand side of your screen is where you control all the attributes for your brush. Now, your brush, if you look down here, you know, in the middle of my screen in the viewport, you see that square thing. I can change that to round if I want to. That is my brush itself. Let's keep this on square just for demonstration purposes. The first box that we have here, terrain is your only option, so let's just stick with terrain. The second box that we see is radius. Now the radius controls obviously what it says it does is the radius of your brush. Makes it bigger, smaller, see how big that is. So you can use this slider here and you can change how big your brush is. You can change it with your middle mouse button, you know, your scroll wheel, I should say, scrolling it forward and backwards. Or you can use the B and V keys. That's B as in boy, V as in Victor. So B for bigger, all right? And V for very much smaller. Yes, that's exactly what that stands for. Okay? All right, so now getting into some of the other settings for this brush, we have opacity, hardness, and value. Now, you're going to have to do some playing around with these things because they're even kind of hard to explain because the differences are very subtle sometimes, right? So opacity, if you look at opacity, the way I explain it now, you know, don't start trolling me if I don't have this exactly right, but it's just the way that I see it and the way that I explain it and the way I'm trying to explain it to you as the beginners that we all are, right? So opacity is basically the strength of the effect. Now you can see I have it turned down. I normally keep mine at 0.05 is where I normally keep it. And the reason I do that is because it's the strength of the effect. Now you can see, you know, when I tap it, see how when I'm just tapping a button, it makes, you know, very, very little changes. You know, nothing's like popping right out of the screen. And I do that because, you know, if you're working around like roadways or something like that, and you only want to make just, you know, a very subtle change to, you know, to the landscape, you want to keep your opacity turned down, as well as your other keys, as well as your other values. I'm sorry. Like I said, this is where you're going to have to play around with them to kind of get, you know, an idea or a feel for, you know, which one does what. But your opacity is the strength of the effect. So if you look at me at 0.05, right, see how when I'm just clicking, it's changing, but, you know, very slowly. Now, if I was to turn that opacity way up when I do it, now see how quick that is? That's the strength of the effect, and it just wham, pops right out at you. See that? That's basically what the opacity does. It's not opacity as in you would normally think about, like, you know, with like like an image editor or something like that, like, you know, whether or not you can see through it or it's not see through, you know, how opaque it is. It's not really anything to do with that. Maybe one time in Giants Editor, you know, history, it did do that, but right now it's basically just the strength of the effect. Okay. Hardness is your second one. So, all right. Now I'm going to take my opacity. I'm going to set that maybe about halfway. Okay. And I'm going to turn my hardness all the way down to like 0.068. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw one line at a pretty constant speed. See that? Okay, now let's have a look at that. Okay, it looks like a pretty soft. It has, you know, nice soft rounded edges. It looks, you know, like any old hill would look, I guess, or any bump in the middle of a field. Now let's turn the hardness all the way up and draw that same line. Okay, now you can definitely see the difference there. So not only did it seem like the speed of what changed, do you see how the edges are like really sharp? You know, they're a lot more defined than if you look here. It has a nice, you know, smooth, consistent feel to it. And this one doesn't. This is a lot more pronounced. You can actually see how square it is and, you know, how sharp the edges are. That's basically what your hardness is doing. So turning up and down your hardness is giving you this effect. Now value, if I turn the value down, now let's put these two in the middle. Okay, well, even hardness I can keep turned down. Say I don't want it too hard. And we'll do the same thing, and we're going to draw another line. Actually, let's turn hardness up a little bit. Do that again. Okay, and see, the reason you're not seeing a whole lot here, I have to go back and forth, back and forth. You can think of the value basically as the flow, right? So if I turn this all the way up and I do that again, see that how it comes out a lot faster. So it's basically like turning a spigot, you know, turning your faucet for your sink up or down, you know, and for any one of these, your value only goes up to 1. So if you want a really strong effect, you can't really type in 5 because it'll only recognize it up to 1. So the way to think about it again is value is basically the speed of the effect. You know, like turning on a faucet, you either want it, you know, coming out a lot, or all the way down, you want it coming out just a little bit. See that? How slow it is? And that's really nice if you're doing some kind of work like, you know, around objects like a roadway or something else where you're just barely trying to affect the land surface. You know, you can have just a really subtle effect on it. And by playing with all 3 of these settings between the opacity, the hardness, and the value, you can usually come up with something that works pretty well for you. Now these I do change a lot, you know, as I go, depending on what I'm painting or, you know, how I'm trying to go about painting it. They do get changed pretty often. Now, I generally keep my opacity at about 0.05, because like I said, I'm trying to usually doing more detailed work and stuff like that, and I don't, you know, want that really, really strong effect. But if I ever feel like I do need that strong effect, then, you know, by all means, I go ahead and I turn it up. My hardness, I also try to keep down fairly low. Unless I'm doing something that requires like a super hard edge or something like that, I don't really, oops, sorry, my text message went off there. I don't really keep that up too high. And in value, maybe somewhere in the middle, again, depends on what I'm doing. All right. Now, for each one of these, like adding, subtracting, stuff like that, you can map those to any one of your mouse buttons that you want. So if you look here, all my default settings, let's find a nice clear area that has been worked on. If you look at, and I also work in a round brush for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's just my OCD. Now, your default settings is the left mouse button is for add, middle mouse button is for smooth, right mouse button is for subtract. If you don't like the way those buttons are mapped out, you can change those. You can make that left mouse button is smooth, subtract. You get the idea, okay? But those are your defaults. I usually keep those where they're at. Sometimes you will need to change it. I'll give you an example of that in just a little bit. This replace value, I'm going to explain what that means in a little bit. And the replace limit, I will also explain what that does in just a little bit. Okay, so moving down the list. Like I said, left mouse button is for adding, middle mouse button for smoothing. So now if I go back over to one of these hills that I already did and say, you know what? I like this one, but it needs to be a little bit smoother. The effect is a little too harsh. Hovering over it using my middle mouse button. See how I can kind of smooth that out. All right, and if I wanted to, you know, have a little bit of a stronger effect, I could turn my opacity up a little bit. There we go. Okay, see how that works pretty good. And that goes for like any bumps in your ground. Like here's one that's barely visible. Well, I can take my mouse, scroll over it, and I can smooth that out into the rest of my land features. All right. Now, same thing if I want to dig a hole, I can use my right mouse button, and I can go ahead and start, you know, taking off layers of ground and digging a pit. Maybe I want to make a lake there. Maybe I want, I don't know, a swimming pool, something. For some reason, if I want to remove ground, I can do that with my right mouse button. So let's get into the next one I want to get into is the replace function. Now, the replace function, basically what that does is it sets your land features to a set value, and with the value being the height. Okay, so let's put this on subtract, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig a hole in the middle of the field here. Okay, so now we got a hole. All right, so maybe this hole was here to begin with, or maybe you put it there and you can't control Z because it's been there for a while, so you can't undo it, but you need to fill it in, and you need to, get this hole taken care of. So now we have two options. One is to use the left mouse button, and we can, add to fill the hole back in, and then we can try and smooth it back out. Or we can remap one of our buttons, and I usually use the right mouse button. So let's remap the right mouse button. We'll remap that to replace. Okay, now while that's remapped to replace, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pick an area. We're going to sample an area right around this hole. Okay, so you're going to pick something basically about the level. If you look around the hole, everything is mostly the same level. I mean, it is different, but it's mostly the same. It's within, a few meters of each other. Okay, so now you want to pick a height that you want this hole, this area of the hole. What height do you want that to be? Okay, so let's go right to the left of the hole here, and using Control and R. See down here where it says replace picking? Control R. Hover over the area that you want. Now hit Control R. Now watch this value when I hit Control R. Right now it's at 47.633. I'm going to hover, hit Control R, and now we're at 80.888. Okay. So now what we did there is we selected this area, we sampled this area, and said this is the height that we want that hole to be at. So now when we go back over that hole, let's using our right mouse button. See what we're doing there? And we're setting that area to 80.888. So now if I hit Control R again, I should get, well, it's a little bit lower, but 80.864, 80.864, 80.864. Okay, so that's what we got. You see how they're all the same height? 80.864. And then if I go outside that hole, now you can see the differences. So that sets everything to one even height. Okay, now this isn't just for filling in holes or anything like that. If you have your map already laid out, and let's say maybe you're on a hilly or a bumpy area or an uneven area of any type, and you want to lay down, or you want to put down a building or some type of placeable, that comes in handy for that. So what you do is, oops, I don't know what I clicked on last time, but anyhow, let's just go with that. This can make a completely flat area for you. So I usually have my opacity and strength turned up just so it gets the job done and you're not going back and forth a million times. Okay, so you always have that turned up while you're doing this between your opacity and your value. Okay, so now that just gave me a nice big square area that's all the same height. Now, with that being said, that's at 83.634 is what I set it for. Now, if for some reason you happen to know your value, like say 90, let's just pick an arbitrary number, 90, and you happen to know that you want your ground to be at 90, this is where that comes in handy. Okay, so you pick 90 and then go back over that, and there we go. So now that's setting everything to 90. Really nice. Another way you might end up using this, so let's say this is a mountain that you had made here, okay, or some kind of platform or plateau of some sort. All right, and let's say it's been there for a while, or you're working on other areas of the map, and later on you want to come back and say, hey, you know what? I want to build maybe a matching platform or something like that, and you want it to be the same height. Maybe you're going to connect it with a bridge or a roadway, and you want to try to make it the same height. Okay, so now, like if I Control R somewhere else, see that's down at 78.653. I can come back up to the top of my plateau here, sample it, and that gets me up to 89.988. So I had it set for 90, so I guess it's not 100% exact, but it's definitely in the ballpark, okay? And this is considering I didn't know that this was already set at 90. So then I said I could sample it, and then I can go ahead and I can build my second platform. See? And they're both at the same height, and then I can work on my bridge and just whoop, shoot that across if I wanted to, and everything is at the same height. That's what your replace feature does. So like I said, you can use it for smoothing out an area if you want to do that, or filling in holes or anything like that. So I think that wasn't so bad, right? I think you kind of got the point of what replace does. All right. Now, when we get into this, below that, you'll see replace limit. And the way we explain this is if we have it on replace lower, anything, no, depending on what I'm set at, let's say, let's keep that at 90. Anything below 90 meters or the value of 90, it's going to bring the ground up to 90. Actually, you know what? Let's pick 80 just because I have something I want to show you here. All right, so anything below 80, it's going to bring up to that level. Okay, see how this is all coming up to 80 right here, how I'm doing this, it's all moving. Maybe I'll pick 85. That might be you might be able to see that a little bit better. 85. There we go. Okay, see how everything's just popping up to 85? So with the value, the replace limit of lower, anything below 85, it's going to bring up to that value. But anything above 85, like these hills, and right now I am right-clicking on it, it's doing nothing because it's above that value. So it's leaving it alone. It's only bringing any value lower than 85 up to 85. And since this is already above it, it's not touching it. But now if I was to go back and I was to change this to higher, so now it's saying that anything above 85, I want you to bring down to 85. So let's say that I built this new platform here, and okay, that's the height I want to go with now. I don't want the other one. I'm not worried about the other one. Okay, so I want to keep it, but I want it to be this height. I want it to be 85. So now with it set on higher, okay, see now if I right click on the ground here, it's not doing anything because that's below 85. But if I come up here to this plateau here where the value is 90, when I right click, in theory, it should bring it down to 85. Okay, and that's exactly what it did for us. See? You know, so the value of higher is anything higher than 85, it'll bring down to that level. And with lower, like I just explained, anything lower than 85, it'll bring up to 85. Now, if you don't mind which does which, when we keep it on none, and basically that's the difference of the two. So anything lower than 85, it'll bring it up. Anything higher than 85, it'll bring it down. If you got that just from this example, hopefully you followed that and can see. So now when I do it, it doesn't matter if the value is higher or lower, it's going to make everything 85. Okay, so hopefully you got that one there. That wasn't too bad, right? Okay, so next on the list, we have slope. Well, we're going to skip erosion right now. We're going to go right to slope. So now that I have this really nice platform here, let's say I'm going to build a road, and I want to build a road that goes up to the top of this platform. Now, there's a few different ways we can do this, but right now we're going to use just a slope feature. One, we can use a spline, and we could try it that way, and I do sometimes. I use it that way. But the slope feature is something that's new to this version. It's brand new to this version of the Giants editor and FS22. And it's a pretty cool and handy feature to have so far, and I enjoy using it. It works really well. All right, so what we're going to do here is we need to remap two of our buttons. So I'm going to remap the right mouse button to slope, and the middle mouse button, I'm going to remap to set slope target. Okay, you got that. So now the way this is going to work is I want to pick an area. So I want my road to go from right here where the cursor is, where the brush is, and I want it to go up to the top of this plateau. Okay, so now with the middle mouse button for the set slope target, you want to click that of where you want to go to. Okay, so where you want your slope to go to. So I'm going to go from lower to higher. So this is my destination. I want to end up here. So that's where I set, I guess that's a little pink arrow is what it is, a little cursor up there. Okay, now to unselect that, just hit your middle mouse button again, and then you can move it somewhere else. Just hit your middle mouse button. Nope, don't want it there. Let's unselect that and move it back right there. Okay, now to actually make the slope, we're going to use the right mouse button. And you want to do this in one motion. So I want to go from where I want to start to where I want to end. So I'm going to, one quick motion. I'm just going to go real nice and easy up to the top there. Okay, see what I did there? All right, it worked out really, really well. I mean, we can use maybe some touching up. Now, if for some reason, let's say we want to build a second slope here. Okay, and I'm going to do this one a little bit faster because I know it's going to goof up if I go fast. All right, so let's reset my slope to up here. Okay, and I'm going to go really fast on this one. Okay, see how that one looked a little bit ugly. Let me turn these up a little bit higher, even my hardness, just so you can get a better idea here. Okay. Now, see how up here it didn't quite fill in a little bit. It didn't fill in the way I wanted it to. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to come back and say, oh, I missed that spot. So we're going to hit the right mouse button and we're going to try and fill that in. Well, no, because remember I said you always want to go from your starting area. And by doing that, it thinks you want to start there. See how it makes that line? It's telling you that is going to be your new slope. Starting here, ending here. We don't want to do that. Okay. So the way to fill that in is to go back again to where you want to start at, down here. Okay, click your start, and then just move real nice and slow. Just go over what you already did, and bring that all the way up to the top there. See there? Perfect. I got two really nice slopes that, boy, I mean, tell you what, this one's really nice. And it doesn't need any work. And the reason that one turned out really nice is because I turned the hardness up. Okay, now you can see the difference between the two of them. See how this one has a nice hard edge, very straight walls to it. All right, and over this one I had the hardness turned down a little bit more. And the edges are a little more rounder, a little bit of a softer look. Now I didn't have the hardness turned down that much lower, so that's why we have this look. If I had the hardness turned all the way down, it probably would have got a more rounded look to it instead of what you have here. And that's what the hardness does. It's a perfect example of what the hardness does. And you can see that as well in the plateau that I made up here, because I had the hardness turned up for that. And see how you got that nice hard edge and that very straight wall? Okay, that's what that does. Now, one thing that is going to trip you guys up sooner or later, now I'm going to jump right into this. Let's say we wanted to paint this. I'm going to put some gravel on it because I want this to be a roadway. So I'm going to go down to my brush tool for texture layer painting. We're going to pick gravel, and I'm going to try and paint this. Okay, now hold on a second. Let me get right into... actually, well, this probably isn't the best example. What I was trying to get at is sometimes when you remap your buttons, you forget that you have them remapped to something. So let's say on my Terrain Sculpt mode, let's say I didn't want this to be here. This plateau, I'm done with it. I don't need it there. I'm going to erase it. So I try to erase it, and nope, I forget that I had that remap to. Set slope. Okay, so I'm going to put that back on subtract. Anyhow, the point that I was trying to make here is inevitably you're going to get to the point where you're gonna end up remapping one of your buttons and forgetting that you had it remapped. So let's go back and say I wanted to paint this again. Okay, now I have mine set on preview so I can see where it's going to paint. Yours might not be showing up like that. There is a setting where you can change that. Now if I try to do it, I'm hitting my left mouse button, but nothing is working. I don't know why. What's going on here? I'm hitting left mouse button. That should work. And it's not. And the reason is because maybe I had the left mouse button mapped to something else. That needs to be on add. And that goes the same thing for the Terrain Sculpt mode. When you when you want to right mouse button and take something off, it needs to be on subtract, obviously. But that gets forgotten about pretty often, that you forget that you had it mapped to something different, and then for the life of you, you can't figure out why that's not working anymore. Okay? And that is basically what that does. So hopefully that made some sense to you, and we'll try to move on to the next one. Or we're not going to try, but we are going to move on to the next one, which is erosion. Now, when you pick erosion, hopefully everybody knows what erosion is. It's the wearing away of the Earth's surface, whether it's through, water, ice, heat, cold, anything like that. It's the wearing away of the Earth's surface. Okay, and this helps to give things a little bit more of a natural look. Now we're going to turn some of these settings down here, so don't forget they're so high. Okay, so I always use my right mouse button when I want to try any of these different not techniques, but if I want to try these different functions. And with erosion, I'll put map that to my right mouse button. And moving down the list, you want to go a little bit further down in your attributes panel. You're going to find noise and erosion. Okay, so you have two choices here. You have hydraulic and you have thermal. Now, I'm going to try to explain this the best way that I can. And again, this is what I know of it. It may not be exactly 100% correct. But with iterations, it's kind of like a loop. It's the number of times you want to run that cycle. So with rain set to 0.48, I don't know if that's 0.48 meters, maybe. Solubility at 0.44 and water evaporation at 0.66. So with the number of iterations, I'm guessing is per brushstroke, maybe. So that would be 55 iterations. It's going to loop through those four settings 55 times per brushstroke. Maybe. I guess. I mean, 55 could be the number of years. Maybe it's 55 years. I don't think it is, but it could be. But anyhow, iterations is the amount of times it's being done. So whether that's 55 years or just 55 cycles per brushstroke is what that does. Again, the rain is just, I guess, the amount of rain that's falling. So is it, maybe 0.48 meters per cycle? And the solubility would be, the way I would think is the amount of, I guess the amount of particles that are suspended in the rain. So as the rain is washing the dirt away, if it's something that's not so soluble and it stays suspended in the water, and that's gonna help in the erosion process. It's gonna deposit more materials at the bottom of hills, and because it's so abrasive and it's holding so much in the water, it's going to help pull more product away. But if the solubility was turned down really low or high, the problem is there's no real literature on this. Everything that we're doing is through experimentation. And I encourage you guys to do just that, to experiment, because, without any real literature, now try to Google some of these things and look them up and see if you can find some things out that way. And it doesn't have to be directly related to the Giants editor, like Unity or any of the other game engines also use these functions, and that's how I ended up learning a little bit about what they do. But that's what I think solubility does. So if it's something that's super soluble and it's gonna dissolve easily in dirt, and it's not gonna remain suspended in the water as it's going, that's what this setting is going to affect. And then water evaporation is exactly what it sounds like, how fast the water is evaporating per iteration, per cycle. Okay, so now I'm going to leave these on our default setting, and we're going to mimic some hydraulic, we're going to mimic some rain, basically, some hydraulic erosion. So let me check my settings, and they're all down fairly low, and since I have this mapped to my right mouse button, that's what I'm going to use to try and do this, okay? Now, it still has a pretty strong effect, so you can see how this is working here. Okay, and that's basically giving me the effect of, water running down this hill over the course of time. And man, that's a really strong effect. And if you don't like it, just hit Control-Z to undo everything, or use this button up top here to undo. This little left arrow is your undo, and that right arrow is your redo. You should know that from our previous videos. And from there, we can maybe turn our opacity down to 0.05. Hardness, go down a little bit lower. And even the value, we can turn that down a little bit lower. Now, the thing to keep in mind, too, is that since it's water, it's going to have a greater effect going from areas of a higher land to a lower land, obviously, because water runs downhill. So it's going to have a bigger impact on that hill than as if water was just running over a flat surface. So if I try this on a flat surface, you can see that it is having an effect, but not as great as it did on the side of that hill, right? Because water was just pouring down there and just really eating away at it. And one other thing you can use this for, too, is to give a more natural feel to your fields and stuff. Because how many times do you drive across a real farmer's field and it's a completely smooth, flat ride from one end to the other? Never, ever. It just doesn't happen, right? So this gives it a little more, now it gives it a more natural feel, but you want to watch how heavy you get into it. because if you put too many bumps and divots and stuff like that, I use it a lot on roadways. I do use it on fields, but I'll come back and I'll smooth it out a little bit when I'm done. And the reason for that is because you don't want to put too many like humps and valleys and holes and divots in your field, or you're going to have some problems when you come back with the harvester and seeding and stuff like that. It's going to skip areas just because it's not making contact with the ground anymore. And it gets a lot more pronounced the bigger the tool has. So if you're running like say like a seeder that's really really big, then you're going to end up missing a lot more spots. The smaller ones can kind of get down in those holes. It depends. But anyhow, you don't want, just the whole point here is you don't want to make too many pits and valleys and stuff in your fields. But you can use this erosion tool to give you a more natural feel. So like on roadways and stuff, you can, if it's coming downhill, you can use this. And like I said, since it's mimicking erosion, it's going to add to some areas and it's going to take away from others. So like say, for example, on this hill here, now this one isn't so straight down, so we're going to go ahead and do it. Now it's really taken away, but you can see, it's hard to see here, but at the bottom here, it is putting dirt into some areas and taking away. Can you see how it's doing that? Sometimes it's adding, sometimes it's taking away. And that's, basically it's mimicking water erosion. Now, like I said, I'm not so sure if the iterations is, number of years or cycles or what. But this is something you're going to have to play around with. Now, this is a pretty strong effect, but it's not always that strong. You can go back and you can change your settings for the opacity, hardness, and stuff like that, and that'll help, cut down that effect a little bit. So we can go back and we can go down to, let's try thermal and see what thermal does for us. And like I said, a lot of this is just trial and error. Try it out, see what it's doing, see what kind of effect it gives you. Don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. You can always undo it. Okay, and thermal, whew, boy, that was a pretty rough one too. And look, it's bad because it's still, it kept my overall, the hill there. And I guess this would just see how at the bottom there it deposited the dirt. So, because the dirt just basically broke loose and fell down to the bottom. And I guess just that's mimicking over years of like heating up and cooling down, and the dirt finally gets dry and cracked and brittle and it breaks off, and down it goes towards the bottom of the hill. Now you can see that since I already went over this, it's not really having another effect because I am hitting my right mouse button. But if I go to an area I haven't done yet, there it goes, okay? And that helps give you a much more realistic look than if you just left everything super flat and super square, with these straight up and down walls the way we had it. Okay, see, now I can kind of go over this again, maybe a little over here. And that gives me, a much more realistic look, a much more natural look. And then on top of that, you can always come back and add like a little bit of hydraulic erosion. So, because you're going to get both in nature. You're going to have, the thermal from the heating up and cooling down, and you're going to have hydraulic because it's going to rain. So you want to come back and add some hydraulics. So like maybe here, there's a low spot, so that the water is going to run down here, and boy does it. Yeah, see, that effect is really strong for me. I don't know. Like I said, it's going to be a stronger effect on hills, but yeah, that one seems a little bit strong. And from there, maybe you want to turn the iterations down a little bit. That's a little low right there. Let's try 25. Sounds like a good number. Rain, let's turn that down a little bit. Maybe not so much rain. Solubility. Now, I don't know if turning it down is more soluble or turning it up. You're going to have to play with that one. I would kind of think that solubility being lower means there's less material suspended in the water. Maybe, but I could be completely wrong on that one. And we'll keep a water evaporation where it's at. Actually, let's turn that up a little bit. Maybe the water evaporating faster will make a difference. Okay, and see, that did have a much more subtle effect to it, right? So I don't have, it's not taking big giant chunks away, like it was before. And what this will do sometimes is it makes these grooves. See how it made like a groove to here? It's hard to see, but it's there. And that's because the water was running down there. Okay, so you can make it up to the top, running down the side. But anyhow, the whole point of that was just to let you know what the erosion tool does and to play around with it, and it does exactly what it says it does. It mimics erosion. whether it's rain or whether it's heat or what have you. That's what that's doing. Okay. What else do we have in there? I think that's it. I think we went over everything. We went over add, so you know how to add. Obviously, with the left mouse button, you add is adding soil. Let's turn these back up a little bit, just so we can go over this one more time. So you already know that left mouse button is adding, right mouse button takes it away, middle mouse button smooths it out. Okay, and you can smooth it out to the point where it's pretty well flat with your ground again, because all it's doing is sampling the surrounding areas and it's trying to smooth it. It's coming up with a middle ground, an average number basically. So it's sampling everything, what you're trying to smooth in the surrounding areas. It's coming up with an average and it's smoothing it out. And so that is that. So hopefully I explained it well enough that you have a pretty good idea of what erosion does. Hopefully you know how to work your replace function, how it makes everything really flat in one area. So you can set down your placeables and stuff like that. And then the other ones, like I said, between the opacity, the hardness, and the value, I tried to explain those the best that I can. Hopefully, you got a good idea or a better idea of what they do. And like I said, I encourage you to play around with them. That's the only way to really get a feel for what these things do, and to fully understand them, right? So like I said, that's everything. I think we covered everything with the terrain editing as far as the terrain sculpt mode. And with that being said, I am Bauer Brown, and I'll see you on the next one.